first thing I'm going to tell you is that I did not have a business plan. So if you're here to learn about business plans, I won't be able to help you. My business plan was probably up here, and it evolved as time went on. But what I am going to tell you is the backstory of how I got to making insect jewelry for a living. When I was in school, I was inspired by the work of Jane Pizer, and she is an artist who lives in North Carolina. And she works in colored clay, and I was fascinated by that. And it's mixing the colorant right into the clay instead of using colored glazes. So this is a box that I made out of colored clay, so those are not painted designs. That design is right in the material. And that process is called Millefiori. And Millefiori is an Italian word that means 1,000 flowers. And it's been used for thousands of years. People have done it in glass. But I was doing it in clay, kind of inspired by Jane Pizer's work. So this is a little tiny extruder. It looks like a syringe, and I'm extruding coils that are square on the end after I had done all my tests. And so I made this big pile. Oh, that's 1981 maybe. My studio was in our dining room, so we did not have a dining room, but I had a studio there while I was in college. So I'm putting all of these little coils together until I made this loaf, which was a quilt pattern. Is that a bear paw? Yes. Any quilters? Yeah. So it was really fun to make this pattern and build it and then cut it, and wow, it's there. And so then I rolled the clay out, and I rolled a slice of that into the clay and made a box like this, which was all really fun. But then every slice that you take off is the same. So I got bored. So I took the clay and I folded a slice of that colored clay over and rolled it out, folded it again, rolled it out, kept going until I had lots of little thin layers of colored clay that made it look almost like watercolor. And that was much more interesting to me. So I started messing with that. This has a glaze over the top, just a clear glaze. So I'd roll out this big mass of colored clay and then make paper patterns to cut out the box shape, and then let it stiffen up a little bit and assemble it. And here's another piece. I was playing with shapes and forms as well, and so I worked with paper patterns and then also with this colored clay. So that's all colored clay, and you can kind of see the different colors coming through there. So this was all during college. There's a group of pieces, and in the front you see all these little pieces. Those are scraps. So my mother told me to not waste anything. So all the scraps that were left over from making the other pieces, I would cut them up and make them into pins and that you could wear. And I'd wear them on the inside of my jacket and sell them. And so I also participated in the very first Art Street, which I think was 1981, somewhere around there. And I was still a student when I did that. So once I graduated, in 1984, we moved into our own house, and then I had a studio in the basement, and I don't have any pictures of that. It was horrible. It was dark and cold, and I'd go down in the winter, and I'd be down there all day in the dark, and then come up, and it would be dark out. So I was making colored porcelain vessels. That piece was probably about this tall. Colored porcelain vessels and sculptural work. I sold it through Edgewood Orchard Gallery up in Door County. This piece is a scent bottle that was in a perfume bottle show in Massachusetts. It's only about this tall. And I think I sent them like a half a dozen. But it was a nice design challenge, and I made a whole series of those little perfume bottles. In order to have some income, I continued to make some jewelry. This is actually a brooch. It would only be about 3.5 inches by maybe 2.5 inches. I made some textured plaster slabs where I pressed the colored clay into it and assembled the pieces. So that's a pin from sometime in the 80s. And there's a pin with a pair of earrings. So I sold the jewelry at Edgewood Orchard Gallery too, and one day I got a call from a sales rep. Her name was Beth Johnson, and she wanted to know if she could buy some of that work and send it to a store in Madison, like wholesale. Like I would just get the money right away. Like, whoa! So I said yes. And so I sent work to that store in Madison, and that started a relationship with Beth Johnson, she represented other artists who made handmade work. They did jewelry and accessories, and she sold to small boutiques and gift shops. And so she took me on, and I learned a lot. I learned how to put together a sample board that would look like this, so you'd make a little collection. And so those are, the bigger ones are pins, the other ones are earrings, you know, 80s pastel earrings, big ones. And I would make like 8 boards of different designs, and she would take those around, take the orders, and send me the orders. I would make the work and ship it to the gallery, and then they would pay me. So I started to make a living doing the porcelain jewelry while I was still doing sculpture. I learned about wholesale pricing. So like if you take your work to an art fair, a lot of artists maybe underprice it. So, but if you're going to price it at wholesale, they're going to like double the price in a store. So I learned that, you know, when you're at an art fair, that your time is valuable then too. So you have to consider that as part of your cost. So I learned that lesson early, and that was very lucky because that's a harder transition to make later on. I learned about deadlines, like they need this order by this time. I learned about debt collection, which I still hate, you know, going after someone to pay you if they haven't paid you. Changing the line to keep it fresh. So I did a line for the spring and then a separate one for the fall. And every year I would make new designs. So I had moved out of my basement, and I rented a building on Webster Avenue, right where the Lorelei parking lot is right now. I rented that building for a year or two until they told me they were going to tear it down. And that I was making my porcelain jewelry and sculpture there. And while I was working there, my second child, Patrick, was born. That's him right there. Looks like we're both moving. So I had to make a decision, and I decided to build a studio. My garage, goodbye to the garage. I added on to the garage and converted the garage to a studio. And it was the only time in my whole life as an artist I took out a loan, and I was terrified. It was $10,000. It cost me $10,000 to build a studio, which now would be pretty good. But I paid it off in 3 years and never took out another loan after that. That makes me nervous. So I continued in that studio. There's the inside. That's the clay room where it was all messy. I had 2 distinct rooms so I could close the door between them and keep all that clay mess in one room. And so that's where I did all my clay work, both sculpture and so here's some sculpture from that time. This is a wall piece. It's about that big. made in 3 sections and then mounted on a piece of board. I also made, this is a series of brooches, so they're actually only this big, but then I framed them so you could take them out of the frame and wear them, or have it be like a small piece of artwork. And probably made from scraps from some of the sculptures. But then I was playing with gold leaf and also fusing glass into it. So always doing new experiments. One year I got my daughter a rock polisher for her birthday. It was really so I could try it. So I made porcelain beads and tumbled them in a rock polisher, and they got this beautiful smooth texture like silk. So sorry, Maggie. And then this is another line of porcelain jewelry, making my own rocks, kind of with layers of colored clay. So this is all in the 1980s. And there's a pin and a pair of earrings that go with that. So working in that studio, I had a second room, and I started messing around with polymer clay when my son Patrick was little. And there were several reasons. Well, it was new to me, a new material. It came in all these wonderful colors, and I could just let it sit out. So when you're dealing with a baby and you're going back and forth, porcelain dries out, it cracks. So I just started messing around with this just to see what I could do with it. I made some jewelry that looked a little bit like my porcelain, only in these wild colors. But this spoke to me in a different way. I thought it was whimsical because of the color. And so for a show, these are actually pins that sit on your shoulder. So they're like little pets. And I made these for a show, and they're pretty goofy. So this is just learning about, because this material is different. Polymer clay is actually PVC plastic. It's not like porcelain. So it's a whole new material to play with. And I made a bunch of little people. Their legs and their arms are made out of telephone wire. When I was a kid, I used to go to the phone company and dig that colored telephone wire out of their trash and make things with it. And so I still had some for some reason. And so I used it, and I think the coating on that telephone wire is PVC plastic. So I tested it in my oven to see if it could withstand the 250-degree temperature that you need to harden the clay, and nothing happened to it. So I felt like I could work with it and bake it right into the pieces. So I started combining the telephone wire and the clay very early on. So around that time, my husband and I separated, and I thought, I need to get a job, because that's going to be more stable. So I got a job. I took a job at Jules Jewels. I don't know if any of you remember that, called Face It Originals, and they made polymer clay jewelry. And so I had a little experience with the material, and I got a lot more working there. We built large canes, that's the loaf, faces, flowers, geometric patterns. So I got to do all of that there. I learned a lot about how the clay works, a lot of different things there. So I worked there for a while, and during that time, someone from the museum, the Neville Museum, called me. They were having a garden show, and they wanted something for the gift shop. So I don't know why, but I thought of bugs, little bugs that you could wear and they would crawl on you. So these are the first ones. They're pretty crude. Their legs are made out of telephone wire. There's beads on the antennas, a technique that I still use today, actually, and I make the legs the same way. But the bodies were pretty crude, but people liked them. And So there's a couple more. I was starting to use other materials like gold leaf and glitter with the clay. And then a sales distributor who sold the work that we did at Face It Originals, she said, I could take those to New York and sell them for you. So she went to the New York gift show with this other work. So I made up a sample board, which I knew how to do from my porcelain jewelry experience. I made up a sample board, gave everything a number, and she took them to New York. She called me from the show, and she said she had $10,000 in orders. And I had 3 months to fill them. So, and I still had the other job. So I worked many nights, many weekends. I had a baby monitor in the studio, and I hired some people that came in the evening that helped me, and we got it done. And then the next year, not long after that, I had to quit that job because I had too much work to do, and it seemed silly to hire other people to help me and then go to work somewhere else. So, but I still continued to work with that sales rep, and so I gave the line a name, Yikes. And so these are all pins, and my friend Dan Cross made a logo for me and continued to sell them in New York. I had studio sales in my studio from the very beginning when I graduated from college. My first studio sale was in my living room, and I invited everybody I knew. I did that all the way through my career, and I liked making these announcements. But in the new studio, I made this little paste-up announcement, and I did them sometimes twice a year in the fall and in the spring. I like doing that because I like meeting the people that buy my work and getting the response from the actual people who like it. When you send it to a trade show and you're sending it to a gallery, you never get that feedback. So it was really good to meet the people who are actually buying it. And I've always done some of that because I think it's important. So this was another studio sale announcement. I set that picture up and someone else took it, but I liked that looking in from the outside. And also I worked at night a lot, so that was accurate. And here's the inside during a studio sale. You can see all those little cardboard boxes on the shelves. That's how I organize. That's my shipping area. So when I got an order, everything had a number, and I pull it out, put the order together, and package it up and ship it right from there. But then when we had a studio sale, the studio got all cleaned up and changed around, and then we usually had a party afterwards. Still continued to do Art Street. One year I rented a Volkswagen Beetle from a guy, and everybody seemed to remember that. That's my daughter helping with the show. That was fun. I had this idea that I was going to get a Volkswagen Beetle and travel around and do shows and just like open up the car. And a guy who knows about cars looked at, it was Sandra Shackelford's brother. He looked at me like this and he said, "No." Because that car that I rented to start it, I had to hold the wires together like this with my hand and then start it, so that wouldn't have been a good thing. But it was fun that one year. So I continued to, I was really busy then. We had a lot of orders coming in. I continued to learn more by building new canes every year. I got better at it, and I got more detailed. And at this point, I'm still doing all my own photography. I grew up in the photography business, so that was helpful. Always adding new pieces and changing designs. This one was really kind of a breakthrough. This was a very detailed cane. There's lots of little tiny dots in there. I started building those canes larger, and then when you build that design large and stretch it out, you get really fine detail, and so I started doing that more and more. So this is all from about the mid-90s, I would say. I started making some silverware. You always have to add something new. So I got these silverware blanks, covered them with clay, and then made frogs and lizards to go on them. I never did anything with fur, no cats, no dogs, always something a little bit creepy. So, and that's the thing, you have to find your own niche in your work. Everybody has to find their own niche, and I guess this was mine. In 1995, I had a chance to go to a business workshop for artists, and it was out in Wilmington, Delaware. It was put on by the Crafts Report, which was a marketing business magazine for artists that I subscribed to. I got a scholarship to go. I stayed with my stepdad's brother and his wife, so I had a free place to stay, and they loaned me their car. So I really saved money, and I learned a lot of things, but I think the best thing was finding other artists that were doing what I was doing, because I felt pretty isolated here. And it was great. We had a lot to talk about, and some of those people are my friends yet today. The very next year, I had another really good opportunity. I got a phone call from Ken Lober in Algoma. He's a jeweler, and he was on the board of the American Crafts Council at the time. They were doing a pilot project. They had a wholesale show for artists who did fine craft, and it was in Columbus, Ohio. And he invited me to be part of this pilot project. I got a free booth, a hotel room, and 2 wonderful mentors in Ken and his wife Donna. And they really helped me go through the whole process of how do you make a booth, make a line sheet or a catalog, something that you give to the customers, because all the gallery owners come to this show to see your work, and they order it. And I had never done that myself. I had always relied on sales reps. So that was a huge opportunity, and so I went to Columbus, and the show was successful, and I got rid of that distributor who was in New York, who I later found out was kind of a shyster. She was telling people that she made the work. And I found that out from someone else. So I was very glad to be done with that and to meet the customers myself and to have relationships with them. So we got very busy. And I decided I needed better photography than what I could do. So this pie server, you can't really see the lizard very well. I did that. I tried to find another photographer, wasn't really crazy about this. I said, no, that's not quite what I want. She went back, and then this background was terrible. It's like, no, that's not it either. And when I was at this show, I met a photographer who only photographs jewelry. And his name was Ralph Gabriner, and he was from New York, and he had a studio set up at this show that I did. So I had him take some pictures of my work. And I learned, and then it made a really nice postcard. Having really good pictures of your work is invaluable. It's one of the best investments you can make as an artist. It gets you into better shows, galleries. The pictures can be used for advertising. I got into a couple of books because I had good pictures. It's the one thing you can't skimp on. And I probably should have done it sooner, but oh well, better late than never. This picture is in the book that's 400 Polymer Clay Designs. It's a Lark book, and that got put in there along with one other one. He did a much better job with the silverware, too. After that first show in Columbus, I met an artist there who told me about another show in Philadelphia. He said that I should try, and the Buyer's Market of American Craft. So I made up my mind. I applied. I got in, and with one show under my belt, I felt like I was a little more ready. I decided I wanted to trademark my name, so I went to a lawyer and they researched the name Yikes. Well, it was already taken by a jeweler in Tennessee. So you can have the same name, but not if it's the same kind of product. So I changed one letter. Whoops, I'm not there yet. Oh, here's some more photographs. That little chameleon took a long time to make. These are some of the other photographs that Ralph took, and I used them so much, and they just got a lot of use. This one was a great one for advertising. And he took this shot too. So I changed the name to Yipes from Yikes. So only one letter, the same typeface, and I trademarked Yipes. So I own the trademark for that, for jewelry. So I used all these photos in my wholesale booths. I made postcards every time I went to a show, and I sent them out to the buyers and gave my booth number. This is one of my early trade show booths. Oh, I look at it now and I cringe, but each frame here had a collection of bugs that were like the same price. So I tried to make it easy for a buyer, because when they come into your booth, they don't have a lot of time. They have to look, they're buying for their store. And so I made it easy for them. All these things in this frame are this price. This frame is all this price. So that and then I made up order forms so that I could just write things in quickly. I did that early on, and it worked really well, and I just stuck with that, that way of organizing. One thing that people say to you when you're an artist, they say, oh, it must be so great to work in your studio and do whatever you want. And it's really not how it works. For one thing, I had to make a living. I was a single parent. It was great to be in my studio and do designing, but there's no way I could do this by myself. From the very beginning, I always had an accountant. Ended up having a photographer, people who did catalogs, graphic designers, printers, but probably the most important people were the people that helped in my studio. I know one of them's here, Sandra.
You didn't show that on the picture.
Yes, I didn't want to have any compromising situations, but this is bad enough. You'll see that it's 1:15 and there's a couple of wine bottles on the table and cake. Maybe it was somebody's birthday, I can't even remember. And I think I'm blowing into a plastic fish or something. But Sandra Shackelford, Christine Schwartz, Patty O'Rourke, and Joan Berkopek, they all worked in my studio. And and the cat, Mom, the black and white cat sitting on Joan's lap, that's Mom. And it was a lot of work. We worked really hard. Everybody was helping with things like fabrication, shipping, making parts, doing computer work, all kinds of gluing pinbacks on, and I could not have done this without people working there. I wish I had more pictures. This was the only one that I could show. But we had fun too. This is another wholesale booth, the years from 1998 to 2006. I'm compressing this now because really I'm giving you the backstory. From 1998 to 2006, we worked like fiends. We were so busy. And the late 90s, the economy was really good too. So that was also very lucky for me. I think I got in the right place at the right time. I had something that was different, that didn't look like anyone else's work. I think that's really important. And so those were very busy years. I did a number of wholesale shows, museum store shows, museum stores ended up being good accounts for me, and the buyer's market, and I got onto a wholesale website, and did the art fairs in the summer, and so always kind of mixing it up a little bit, and it was nice to be able to be flexible in that way. Every year I put out a catalog. This is one of the first ones, 1996. I took the pictures, I pasted them, I glued them onto a piece of paper, and I photocopied them. So that was the first catalog. Pretty rudimentary, but everything had a number. And then my friend Dan, who had Idea Studio, did my catalog in, this is 1998, or 99. So he did it that year, got better, and then the next year it got even better. So he did a beautiful job. And he did my catalog for several years. And every year I changed about 1/3 of my line. So 1/3 new work every single year. That does a couple things. Keeps me from getting totally bored, and it keeps customers coming back because they want to see what's new. They always want to see what's new. So you have to do that. Then the economy kind of took a downturn after 9/11, and for a few years it was a little tougher. I had to go with a less expensive catalog company. I found a guy out in New Jersey who did only jewelry catalogs, so then the price came down because he was doing a lot of this. So we worked well together. He could also cut out these images and put them on a wholesale website, so that worked too. But we still did either a whole new catalog or maybe a one-page insert every year. So at least every other year there was a new catalog. That's the last catalog I did. When you're working really hard, lots of nights, lots of weekends, you need to give yourself a break once in a while. And I had the opportunity to go to Iceland and teach. Remember that business class I took out in Wilmington? I met a woman from Iceland there. She ran a traditional crafts school, and they had never had a non-traditional medium. So they were teaching pottery, weaving, fiber arts, wood carving. She said, oh, if you're ever in Iceland and you want to teach, here's my card. Well, I thought about that for a year, and I kept her card, and I kept looking at it. I finally wrote her a letter and faxed it to her. This was before email. This was in the 90s. And I asked her if she was serious about that. And I hadn't traveled outside of the US very much at all then. Well, we made it happen. I went to Iceland and I taught a class for adults during the day and a class for kids during the day and a class for adults in the evening for a week. The kids spoke English, the adults did not. And so all of the teaching was just by showing them things. And the woman who ran the school invited my friend who went with me. She invited us to stay at her house for that week. So it was really a wonderful experience. And then we brought camping gear, and we went camping in Iceland after that. And we hitchhiked. And it's a really safe place for women traveling alone. So it was a good starter country. And the newspaper came and took these pictures, and I have no idea what this says, but any PR is good PR, right? Even if you don't understand it. So that was one really wonderful trip. I took another trip 10 years later with my friend Chris, who's here, and several other women. Chris had a nonprofit called Beacon House, and we walked the Camino de Santiago. 500 miles. We all paid our own way and raised money for the Beacon House. I had turned 50 that year and sent my last child off to college, and it just seemed like the time to do it. And I took a 9-month sabbatical, actually. The trip only lasted 6 weeks, but it was one of the best things I've ever done, actually. And you all start together, but everyone finishes at their own pace. Because when you walk, you have to walk at your pace. And you meet people from all over the world. And so you might walk with someone else for a while. This day I was walking alone up this mountain, and it was all misty. It was like one of my happiest days on the trail. So when you get stuck somewhere, go for a walk. Doesn't have to be 500 miles. It can just be around the block. But the 500 miles was good too. After the Camino, I was re-inspired to do some new work with landscapes on the backs of the bugs. And this was after a bike trip in Italy. In 2005, I got married again. My husband back there, Don Kraft, and we bought a house together. So we moved 3 blocks away from where my house was. So I rented out my house and kept my studio. So I'd walk back and forth and go to my studio. For 5 years I did that. And in 2010, after 5 years, I decided the marriage was going to stick and I could build a new studio. So I sold my house so that I could pay for the new studio. And we built this studio. And Don really helped a lot. I hired a builder who was great. And we got to keep the garage this time and build the studio behind the garage. And I wanted to stay in my budget so I could have either plumbing or windows, and you can see that I chose windows. It's not a very large studio. It's about 600 square feet because that's all I could do zoning-wise. I did all the painting and I finished the floor myself. And I wanted an outdoor space, so we put a pergola coming out from the sliding patio doors. And then to save money, I took all the guts from the old studio, the cabinets and the countertops, took them out, brought them over here and reconfigured them so that I just reused all the cabinets and the countertops. So that was good. And once I got in that studio, and after coming back from the Camino, I kind of dialed my work back a little. I didn't work as hard as I used to. Didn't have as many employees, and started feeling kind of restless. About 7 years ago, I started volunteering with Curative Connections, sorry. And I do artwork with people with early onset Alzheimer's or other memory impairment. And so after 25 plus years, oh, this is the new studio space working. I like to have my stuff all around me and then just get in the middle and be able to reach everything. I really like, and I like designing workspaces. You can see that I use the vertical space. When it's small, you just go up. This was a studio sale in the new studio. So I did continue to work after moving into the new space. Still made new pieces. But by that time, I had one employee, Joan, who was left. But it was easier for me to come and go then and to do some other things. So it's been 25 plus years since I've been making bugs. So now I am working on a plan. It's a loose plan, but it's an extinction plan. It's fluid. I'm not making new designs. I didn't go to the wholesale show this year, but I sent all of those customers an email and let them know what was happening, and I gave them a deal. I said, if you order by February 15th or something, you get a discount, but it has to be shipped by June 1st. So this last spring, I was really busy because they said yes. And so I got a lot of orders, shipped all that work out, did some art fairs this summer, and have a couple more things that I have to ship work out for, but I am really ramping it down. And then I'm on my way to, not retirement, but metamorphosis, I think. And so instead of, I'm going to go back to being a caterpillar, because a caterpillar has to eat a lot, and I'm going to feed myself, not literally, but like with messing around in my studio and doing things I don't have to sell. And I don't know what it's going to be yet, but that's going to be the next step. So that's the backstory. And does anybody have questions? Yeah, Bonnie.
Were you still using your childhood telephone wire all the way through?
No, I found there were people that knew that I used it, and so like they stripped it out of houses sometimes. But then Don Taylor, who used to teach at St. Norbert, he had a big stash, and he gave me a big stash of it.
So you can't buy that anywhere?
No, they don't even use it anymore. So I still have some, but actually on Thursday, our program that we're doing out at Curative, we're going to do some wire sculpture using that telephone wire. So, because I'm not going to need it anymore. So, yeah. Sandra?
Fritzy, you know, here we are, and we've listened to your story. And the thing that amazes me is how you started out and your work ethic, and how one thing led to the other. The courage you had, the trust in the future, how things came together through the people that you met, and what you developed. It's quite remarkable.
Thank you. Well, and when you have to eat, that's a motivator. And when there's 2 kids to support, that also is a motivator too. So, yeah.
What was the favorite bug you ever made? Or lizard, or whatever.
That's like asking which is your favorite child.
Wait, what, do you have anyone that you really?
You know what? That Italian landscape one was one of my favorites. That was really challenging.
Yes.
So that was a fun one. And I don't even know if I have one. I hope I do. But it was fun.
I have that yellow one that you had the other one that looked with the big lips.
You do?
Yeah,
Oh, that's good. I know. There's a lot of stuff I don't know who bought it or where it is. Yeah.
When you would put together a sample board, so you had the design picked out already, and then the buyer could say, oh, I want, however many of these.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have an excess of the polymer pattern already made, or do you have the steps written down on how to recreate it?
No, so when I build those designs, remember that loaf that I had made out of porcelain? The polymer is really the same. I would make a whole loaf, and it would stay in the line as long as I still had that loaf. And so sometimes it would last more than 1 year, or if I made a really big one, it might have lasted several years. But sometimes, and I never measured or weighed any of my canes. They're all different sizes, so some of them only lasted 1 year. But that kept it interesting for me, because then I'm always making new designs. So, and then it went extinct. So, yeah, Dean.
Can you tell us how you would do the shows, like in Philadelphia? Flying there, shipping them, or driving. How did you do that?
I mostly flew there. Because Philadelphia in February, you don't want to drive there. And so the first year I shipped all my display materials. I think I had 11 pieces. It was shrink wrapped on a pallet, and it cost me a lot of money to ship it. So every year I tried to make my booth tighter and tighter and tighter. And so I got it down to 2 plastic crates. It was under 200 pounds. And so you learn by doing that stuff and how to make things. you know, fit in the crates and making things small. So I would fly and then ship it out by truck, ship my display out there by truck. Yeah, well.
How did you, when it comes to artwork like this, how did you decide on your wholesale pricing and your retail pricing when you're showing?
Well, the wholesale pricing, I kind of figured out my time, materials, overhead. It was kind of a guesstimate, to be honest. And the retail pricing is usually 2 times, it used to be 2 times the wholesale price. So like when I would sell work at an art fair, I would sell it for retail price because I was doing all the work at the art fair. But now a lot of galleries and stores, they might more than double the price. They might go 2.2, 2.4 times the wholesale price. So that means the store gets more for it than I do, which always kind of irks me a little, but that's the way it works. So, yeah.
Have either of your children followed in your step, artistically speaking?
No, not really. They both, my daughter is pretty artistic, but she teaches Italian at a college. My son is more of a musician, but he does computer stuff with a hospital. So, so I'm glad neither of them wanted to take this over. They found their own lives, but they both spent time in the studio growing up and were exposed to it, and both of them ended up working in the studio at least for a little while. But no, they needed to have their own lives. So.
Are you going to be teaching a class at the Artisan Center?
I don't know. That is going to be the answer to a lot of questions right now. I don't know.
Are you going to, because you told me you went to Italy and you took the mosaic class?
I did. I took a few years ago, my daughter had to do research there, and so Don and I got to go and take care of our grandson. Oh, that's so horrible. And and we were in Florence, and then I went, because that's where she had to do her research, and then I went to Ravenna afterwards and took a week-long mosaic class. I like taking a class outside of my own medium, and mosaic is something I would like to do more of. I just don't know where it's going to go yet. So, yeah.
The IRS, you got to get your work permit, you got to get the sales tax. I'm stuck there. I don't understand it. I'm up against, I'm an artist. I am not an accountant.
That's why I had an accountant all through I always have had an accountant. Well, you know, when you're just starting, one thing that really helps is if you use the Schedule C on your tax form, because if you're a sole proprietor, so that tells you all the things you can deduct. That's a great place to start. That's what I started with, but eventually I became a corporation. I just closed my corporation at the end of June. Because I had employees, when I got employees, my accountant said I should incorporate. And I closed my corporation June 30th, and now I'm a sole proprietor again. So, because I don't need all that stuff anymore. I can just, it's simpler, and so as I'm selling out inventory and not sure what's going to happen next, that was just an easier way to go.
Do you have a website and do you maintain it?
That's a good question. I used to have a website. My son made it for me when he was in college, and he's 31 now. I took it down a few months ago because my plan was to do one myself on Wix, and I haven't done it yet. And I think, what's the point now? So I have a Facebook page for my studio. So I did a separate Facebook page for my studio. But I have to, and I know that's the way the world is going now. Like postcards and print, that's all kind of going by the wayside. Social media, and it's like, I don't want to do that stuff. That's another reason why I'm getting out. Because I'd have to have someone do it. So my website is down right now, but I have a Facebook page under Joyce Fritz Studio.
Yeah, but I liked getting your postcards.
Yeah, and you know what? I had one gallery person came and said, your work isn't right for our gallery, but I love your postcards, and I always look forward to them. So they were very useful for me. Well, and people can click and delete something really quickly, but if you have like a nice image or something, they might put it up on their bulletin board or save it or something. So, Margie.
What are your thoughts about e-commerce? Because I know a lot of people, especially.
Yeah, and a lot of people do it. There's Amazon, there's Etsy, I haven't really done that because it would have been competing with the galleries that were selling my work. So I haven't done that, and it's also a lot of work. Then you're dealing with, when you're selling wholesale, you're shipping out a whole bunch of things at once. When you're selling to one person, you're shipping and then they don't like the color, and then you got to return it, and it's like, oh, I don't want to do all that.
So currently, Joyce, do you sell out of your studio? Are extinct?
Well, the Neville Museum is still carrying my work in their gift shop. I might have a studio sale before the end of the year. I don't know yet. But I've been involved in the Mill Art Center has a holiday sale in Denmark. I'll have work there. And definitely the museum still. And they'll have it until I don't have any more work. I'll make sure I keep them supplied. So.
There's just so much humor when you look through your work. Some of those would just make you just laugh. They're just, not cartoonish, but and you're so connected to the earth. Everything, you are an environmental artist.
Well, and one of the things I learned, I was not an entomologist at all, but Joan Berkopec, who worked for me for like 17 years, was trained as a naturalist. I learned so much about real insects from her, and she was also a fastidious, meticulous worker. She was amazing, and so yeah, I learned through that, but I never thought that this was how I would have made my living.
So I'm curious about what your process was. So were you sketching your designs first, and then or were you just playing with the clay and it would kind of evolve? I'm wondering how your brain works.
Yeah, well, actually, early on, I would get field guides for insects, because what I wanted to do is look at real insects and see where, what shapes are they. I wanted to capture the essence of real insects, but then I would make some that looked like a real one, like that one that was in the beginning. That was a real one. It was a gold grasshopper. But then I like to make them up too. So it was always this back and forth between real insects and made-up insects.
But the pieces you had at the Lawton, were those real bugs?
No, that was a really thing. I was part of a show recently at the Lawton Gallery at the university, and they asked people to come in to the Richter collection, which is their natural history collection out at the university, and make a piece based on that. And I had done that before. I'd done it several times. I'd gone out and looked at real specimens, and so I made these two boxes. One was a box full of insects, and for that piece I could open up the wings and make them very delicate because they weren't meant to be worn. And so one box was all different insects, and it was dated with today's date. The second box was all flies, and it was dated 100 years from now. So that piece was about the loss of biodiversity that's happening in nature right now. So I do pay attention to that stuff because I feel like it's connected with my work.
Is that show still open?
No, it's down, but it's going to be in Door County at the Crest Center in Egg Harbor. It's opening in around the 5th of November or so, and my piece is going to travel to Door County for that show. So, yeah.
Your journey has been remarkable. Would you ever consider writing a memoir? Or the talk that you have given today has been so inspirational, and I think that putting it on paper, what you have said tonight, and
I might need some help with that, Sandra.
That would be very inspiring. Take her class.
Do you know any?
Really?
Because I don't really think of myself as a writer. Sandra is an artist and a writer, and she teaches some wonderful writing classes, so I might have to take one.
We have some powerful women artists.
We do. And thank you so much, Joyce, for sharing
Yep,
your
thank
story
you. Thanks for having me.
and taking us on your journey. And thanks to all of you for coming.